Shows Phil Hartman and John Belushi sitting in chairs in a television studio. Hartman: Hello, I'm Hill Fartman, and we are back with another installment of SNL's Crazy Critics, where each week one of our 6 esteemed SNL critics will critique the last SNL episode. Tonight we have with us John Belushi, a semi-retired sketch comedy veteran. And last time you were with us, Johan, you said you cut your teeth in sketch comedy in mid-1960s Somalia, but then later you said it was actually in Zimbabwe. Where do you claim your sketch comedy roots reside from today? Belushi: Egypt. I'm a descendant of the Egyptian god Adam. Hartman: Now, was that before or after Adam's merging with Ra? Belushi: Nonsense. It was Amun who merged with Ra. Hartman: Perhaps Ra was just a bit promiscuous with his mergers. Anyway, what did you think of SNL's Cold Open? Belushi: The Cold Open was too regressive for me. It reminded me of 1970s Cairo, where you couldn't even portray Muhammad while performing sketch comedy in the street. I guess he must have been black or LGBTQ or whatever. Hartman: Johan, it's LGBTQIA2S+. Don't say only part of the name. Belushi: Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know the name changed. Hartman: You know, what's with you reactionary conservatives anyway? You can't even handle changing names, let alone genders. Before you mention the LGBTQIA2S+ movement, be sure to do a Google search beforehand to make sure you're all caught up with the name. Doing otherwise tacitly allows people to take away trans minors' rights to have their cosmetic surgery covered by their parents' insurance. Belushi: Wait, there's kid trannies now? Hartman: Good God, man! Please, let's just move on and get to the monologue. Belushi: Well, I'll say this. When I was performing sketch comedy in 1970s Cairo, I was pouring my blood, sweat, and tears out all over the audience. And on Saturday nights, after 6 grueling days of performing sketch comedy in the streets of Cairo, day and night, in my grotto, I had an old television that had been imported to the area during World War II. And although the volume worked fine, there was no picture that came through the screen. So every Saturday night, I would listen to SNL like it was on the radio. I didn't find out until decades later on reruns that Chevy Chase used to fall down. But now when I'm forced to watch SNL with their video as well, it's just different, like a loss of innocence. So for me anyway, viewing the Cold Open was just another reminder of innocence lost. Hartman: Okay, and again, moving on from the Cold Open, what were your thoughts on the monologue? Belushi: The entire monologue was compromised by Jack Harlow admitting he was created by the CIA. Hartman: I think he was just making a joke about the silliness of internet rumors in general. Belushi: The CIA is no joke, man. 1970s Cairo. I was an undercover agent. I was so undercover that the CIA didn't even know about it. I would write them letters about what was going on in Cairo. I sent the messages in a coded language I had made up. I'm not sure if they ever deciphered the code, as I never received any correspondence. Until the Cold Open, that is, where Harlow went to an audience member and she said her name was Michaela. Michaela is code in my language for no regime change at this time. Harlow then asked her what she wants to say to the world, and she said that she's the biggest Jack Harlow fan. Biggest Jack Harlow fan is code in my secret language for cease all Egyptian operations and return home. But that's just like the CIA, isn't it? Well, with their bureaucracy. I stayed in Cairo for 45 years waiting for them to respond. And I returned home early, under duress and fear of reprisal, to look after my sick and dying mother. And finally, years later, they finally say, biggest Jack Harlow fan. But that won't bring my mother back. If I'd been there for her earlier, if the CIA could have moved faster, maybe she'd still be here with us today, at 103 years old. Hartman looks up from his phone and says, okay, great, and how about the Joker sketch? Belushi, well, Hill, I thought maybe I'd continue to wax poetic a bit more about how I spent my entire life being so undercover for the CIA that they didn't even know about me, and how their failure to decipher my code fast enough led to my mother's early demise in her late 90s. Hartman, actually, Johan, we were worried you'd go off the deep end, so we do have Heath Ledger here with us to critique the show. Heath Ledger comes out and sits down. Applause, applause, applause. Hartman, so, Heath, how about that Joker sketch? Ledger, oh, I love the joke a bit, and I'm a fan of unexpected cameos, so it was great to see Tom Hanks out there. Hartman, Tom Hanks cameoed later in the evening. This sketch, it was Jeff Probst who cameoed. Ledger, no, mate. It was Probst who came out during the AA sketch, and then reprised his role as drunk uncle during Weekend Update. Hartman, what are you talking about? Drunk uncle is Bobby Moynihan. Ledger, mate, Bobby Moynihan came out as David Pumpkins. Hartman, well, there were so many wonderful cameos, it was hard for Heath to keep track. Back to you, Johan. Any thoughts on the cameos? Belushi, cameos? Cameos? Are you kidding me? Cameos? I sent out 37 different pamphlets to the people of Cairo, telling them about the evils of communism. It took me decades to complete those pamphlets promoting capitalism, and I'm proud to say I never made a dime off of them. But speaking of cameos, I did have a man, Abdul Karim Jabbar, make a cameo in one of my sketches. He claimed he was there to hand me service of process papers based on a lawsuit trying to remove me from the sidewalk where I performed, which was deliciously ironic, as the character he inadvertently portrayed in the sketch while making the cameo was there giving me papers ensuring that I was always allowed to stay on that sidewalk. And that's really the heart of everything, isn't it, Fartman? Today the hero, tomorrow the villain. Two sides of the same coin. Papers asking you to leave the sidewalk. Papers asking you to stay. At its most base structure, everything is simply a state of energy, expressing itself to the world through various means and modalities. Hartman, Mr. Belushi, if I may finish. Where was I? Oh yes, Wendy's never made it to Egypt. I never had the chance to admire the Sphinx while eating a double stack with cheese. There were no Frosties out there in that desert land, the oasis of the soul. Oh, how my soul moved to the winds and sounds of Cairo. But as much as my spirit felt like the colors of the wind in Cairo, without Wendy's burger chains, an existential modicum of dread underwrote all of my experiences there. Hartman, how about the Sketcher sketch? Dave Thomas comes out, hands Belushi a tray of Wendy's burgers, as Belushi says, thank you, Dave. Mr. Fartman, I'm glad you asked me my thoughts on Kanye's recent rhetoric. Hartman, no, I didn't. I asked you about the SNL Sketcher sketch. Belushi, when I was in 1970s Cairo, I came upon a mystic who was a fervent student of the Kabbalah. And she told me that there is one secret to life that must always be respected, lest you destroy the natural law in the state of being. Never mess with the Jews. Hartman. Oh boy, moving on to the Halloween red carpet show sketch. Belushi, if I may finish. This mystic, whose name was, I actually don't remember her name, but I only remember she had a great set of cans. I called her nice cans. Hartman, why don't we try the AA sketch, get back to fun cameos, maybe push through to some weekend update analysis, avoid anything that could be categorized as anti-Semitic? Belushi, now wait a minute. I said the secret to life is to just not mess with the Jewish people. How is that anti-Semitic? If anything, it's unapologetically pro-Semitic. Hartman, please, sir, just stop. I have a family, for Christ's sake. Dead from the earth, we're not alive. It's Saturday Not Alive, starring John Belushi, Chris Farley, Bill Hartman, Jen Hooks, Norm MacDonald, Gilda Radner, Denitra Vance, and many other special deceased contributors. Musical guest, Takeoff, and your host, Theodore Roosevelt. Everybody, Theodore Roosevelt. Applause, applause, applause. Roosevelt. Thank you, thank you. I'm happy to be here. As a child, I was born with debilitating asthma and learned to overcome it by living a strenuous lifestyle. I went to Harvard, and by 24, I wrote a book on the history of the Naval War of 1812. I got into politics and was part of the reform branch of the Republicans on the New York State Legislature. Philip Seymour Hoffman, as Joe King comes out and says, "Okay, T-Roos, you had asthma, huh? Wow, okay, so now we're just going to hear about a bunch of success and happiness, yada, yada, yada." Roosevelt, my wife and mother died on the same day in 1884, devastating me psychologically. Hoffman, yikes. How'd you bounce back from that? Roosevelt, I recuperated by operating a cattle ranch in the Dakotas. That freed my mind to allow me to bounce back and become the Assistant Secretary of the Navy under President McKinley. And in 1898, I helped plan the successful naval war against Spain. I then resigned and built the Rough Riders, a unit that helped fight the Spanish in Cuba. The 1,060 men and 1,258 horses making up the Rough Riders pile on the stage. Roosevelt, when I returned home, I was elected governor of New York and then became vice president to McKinley. And after his assassination, became the 26th and youngest president of the United States. Applause, applause, applause. As president, I promoted my square deal domestic policies, promising the average citizen fairness, breaking of trusts, regulation of railroads, and pure food and drugs. I prioritized conservation and established national parks, forests, and monuments to preserve the nation's natural resources. In foreign policy, I focused on Central America, where we began construction of the Panama Canal. Hoffman, was this back when the canal was west of the Mississippi instead of east of Atlanta? Roosevelt, yeah, talk about a Mandela effect. Anyway, what I'm most proud of in my life is that I gave it my best shot. I didn't sit on my butt. I went out and lived and made the world a better place. Now, Juris Dr. King, I understand that you have come under immense scrutiny for your handling of this show. Hoffman, well, Mr. President, I am getting recruitment letters from loony bins all over the country. Roosevelt, well, let me tell you this. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena. whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. So his place will never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. We have a great show tonight. Takeoff is here. So get ready for our last memory of us versus them as we enjoy Casper. We'll be right back.